Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here and speak a little bit about implications and policy priorities of the new digital age, or as the organizers of this conference put it, the fourth industrial revolution. In fact, I prefer typically to speak about a combination of technological transformations rather than a revolution, because, as you might know, this has often been criticized somewhat. However, what I think is the important characteristic distinguishing these transformations currently, so the fourth industrial revolutions from the revolutions in the past, I think is that it blurs probably the lines between physical, digital, and biological spheres. So quickly, a short outline of my talk. The three technological transformations I consider important in this context are the Internet of Things, advanced manufacturing techniques, and technology-enabled platforms. And I will speak about each of these briefly and tell them what I think they are, and especially what their implications are in various respects. I also have a couple of examples from European companies implementing these, but I'll probably just go over these very quickly in the interest of time. Then, following up on Carl's presentation just given, I will discuss some of the characteristics of work and labor markets in the new digital age, and then follow up with mentioning some of the challenges for education and for labor market regulation. Then I would also quickly like to discuss some of the challenges that international cooperation needs to do, or international cooperation fora should be addressing, such as the G20 and so on, because I think they also have an important role to play in shaping this new digital age. And then I end with some policy recommendation priorities, and also quickly address the German program Industrie 4.0, Industry 4.0, which I've been asked to do. But let me just address the three technological transformations very briefly, one after the other. So the first important one, I think, is the Internet of Things, also called the Industrial Internet, or many other names for this are floating around as well. I think the basic idea of this is that industrial machines are equipped with sensors on the one hand, and that these machines are connected to the Internet, so they write data into the cloud. The implications of that are sensors provide live data for manufacturers and for companies. So you could imagine that you could switch from reactive maintenance, as we have it now, of machines, to completely preventive maintenance, because you basically know ahead of time when parts will wear out, and you can replace parts before they actually break. This will be a potentially big change to how things are done currently. Now, sensors write into the cloud. They write continuously data into the cloud, so you will have big data that needs to be analyzed and that can be analyzed in order to improve production processes and many other things. And then you have communication between machines. So this implies that we probably see ongoing automation, and that you can think of very small lot sizes in production. So basically, it means that you can produce one part of a specific product, and then produce another variety of that, just one after the other, which is of course a big advantage as well for companies and also consumers. Just very quickly, there's a factory in Austria that produces gas engines. It's owned by GE. And they produce gas engines that are very small, that can be deployed very decentrally. So many farmers use it, for example, for biofuels and so on. Now, these gas engines are produced by industrial robots in an integrated automated facility. And what Jenbacher does is they digitally survey these machines, and 80 of these engines that they produced actually can be proactively maintained. So they monitor them continuously, and can do preventive maintenance of these engines. And they estimate that a downtime of 6 to 8 weeks of such an engine would cost them $160,000, which of course can be prevented by these new technologies there. Now, the second big trend, I think, is what I call advanced manufacturing. So what I mean by that is additive manufacturing, 3D printing in particular, and that companies can now actually form a digital thread linking all production stages from design, engineering, and so on until distribution and servicing. All this is linked in one digital thread. So what does it imply? This 3D printing idea, I think, has two implications. The one is that you can, of course, print prototypes and test prototypes at much higher speed, much quicker than you could in the past, and it involves lower costs, of course, for companies. I think this is widely done already, so this is not much of a revolution there. What I think is not that much developed is that spare parts can be printed, potentially. So you can, again, have this decentralized maintenance. So think about aircrafts, for example, landing in some remote airport and something breaks. In principle, the technology could imply that these spare parts are being printed there at the location, and the aircraft can be put into service quite quickly again. I think this has big implications, potentially, for jobs in decentralized regions, but also for the global value chains in general. Now, the digital thread, what does it mean? I think we can expect much more customization. As I said, we can produce in small lot sizes, and it also means that workers will become multitaskers in a way. I say a few words about that in just a short while, because they cannot be specialists anymore, right? They cannot focus on their specific area of expertise anymore, but they need to expand their span of competence in order to include also other production stages. Now, taking together these two technologies or several technologies, I think they mean that we can expect changes in global value chains. If you can print certain parts of your product just at your production location, you do not have to import it from somewhere else, for example, which means that we might see entirely new patterns of comparative advantage, of specialization. We might see something we call reshoring, so production stages being brought back to where the company is located. You might also see developments in the other way around. So this is a completely open question, I think, but I think potentially all these technologies will change these global value chains significantly. I just want to mention quickly an example of 3D printing from Airbus, who actually used this for prototyping, making parts for test flights, but who have also used 3D printing technology now in a commercial in-service aircraft for the first time. They can produce non-standard parts in very low quantities in less than 24 hours using these technologies. They currently print plastic and titanium, and they plan to print alloy and superalloy. I just got to know a material scientist yesterday, and he probably tells me that this is all nonsense, what I'm saying there. But this is what I read in the in some documentaries about Airbus. So I think there's big potential in these technologies. Now the third one, and I think this is particularly important also for labor markets, it's what we call technology-enabled platforms. So you know these seminal examples, right? Uber, Airbnb, and so on. All these technologies potentially matching supply and demand of some underutilized assets. There are many platforms that also trade labor services in that way. So there are platforms where interior designers exchange jobs, where specific occupations meet. You have platforms for low-skilled tasks, for high-skilled tasks, and so on. So what does it mean? I think it means, on the one hand, that companies can really employ their talent globally with tradable tasks, and it could mean, at the same time, that we will observe fewer standard employment relationships, stronger individualization of employment biographies, and it might potentially also mean that national regulation could be undermined, because not often you are being paid hourly wages on these platforms, but maybe lump sum amounts for your job and so on. So you don't know where the workers are located. So I think looking at this more closely is an important issue for labor market regulation. Now, just very quickly, because Carl addressed actually most of these points already in his presentations, what are the characteristics of work and labor markets in the new digital age? I think we might see a lot of new occupations, well, say new in the sense that they will change significantly from what we see now. We'll have big data jobs. I was just looking at my Facebook account the other day, so I was offered a big data job at BMW, for example. So whatever that means, but there will be jobs like that, looking at huge amounts of data. Another one is geoinformation systems, for example, which are currently becoming very important. We will see ongoing automation. Carl mentioned it. Lawyers, financial analysts, doctors, journalists, accountants, and so on. Their jobs can partly, at least, be automated already. We'll probably see an ongoing polarization, shrinking middle-income class, and what is safe, he mentioned it too, are jobs requiring social and creative skills, because these are apparently things that computers cannot yet really do. Based on these platform economics, we will probably see new forms of collaborations between companies and personnel. What we have now will probably change quite significantly in the interest of employees, but also of employers. This is an interesting relationship, I think, that needs to be studied much further. Sorry for that. And as I mentioned, we will see multitasking of workers. I have done a small study myself where we asked a little more than 1,000 employees in Germany in 2013 detailed questions about the job tasks carried out at work of those people, and we asked them that if the scope of their work activities, if they consider it to have become broader, smaller, or roughly identical to 5 years ago. And what we found is that the majority of workers in that sample says that the scope of work activities has become broader than 5 years ago, and this is particularly pronounced in manufacturing industries, in fact. Now, this is just a rough look at the data at the moment, but I think you can already take this as a trend indication. So the span of competence, the scope of tasks being carried out by workers at work is expanding over time, and I think the digital technologies have an important role to play in that development. So what are the challenges? We see diverse employment biographies. We have many non-standard employment relationships, which of course means that welfare states, insurances, health insurance, retirement insurance will have to react. In Europe, it has important implications for trade unions, of course, who have an important role in wage setting and in labor market policy in general. So these things that are already of concern to trade unions, of course, and they look at this issue. But since we don't know exactly what's ahead, this requires much more study, I think. We will see a change in the number of jobs, some decline, some grow, and we might also see a change in the location of jobs. As I said, if the value chain changes, we might see jobs in completely different regions than we see today. Some studies, including Carl Frey's study, claim that the digital age has not created many jobs yet, but as he mentioned as well, in principle, these innovation jobs are extremely important because they have large local multiplier effects, and it might not be sufficient just to look at the new industries or the digital industries in creating jobs, but what they do apart from it, creating other jobs in the local market, is extremely important too. Now, international cooperation, where does it affect it? As I said, we see new patterns of comparative advantage, perhaps. So, whenever we see localization of production or reshoring, whatever you would call it, a big question is it now protectionism that leads to localization of production, which is often being claimed in international fora, or maybe it's also an effect of technology, and that's of course important to distinguish that. And to find out what's the cause of localization trends that we actually observe at the moment already. Global trade is on a plateau, is not increasing at the moment, so the question is what's behind this, and this is an important issue that needs to be addressed, I think, and that has a connection to digitalization. Now, the global hiring of labor services, what does it mean for national regulation? Do we create some kind of standby workforce that has problems in social protection and so on? I think this is another issue that needs to be addressed internationally. And then, of course, very important, we have these really large network externalities in the new digital age, leading to potentially giant multinational companies. And there are questions, of course, in terms of taxation and competition policy. How do we address these? And this is quite unclear at the moment. And I don't think we have good solutions for that currently. So what needs to be done? Let me quickly address some policies. This is only among other things, of course. For education and training, one could imagine that we need to kind of forecast occupations and future demand. We will probably need to teach competencies to cope with change in particular, because change will be more rapidly, occupations and also their content will change quickly. And in order to keep these people employed, they need to know how to change. We need to teach them creativity, interpersonal skills. Well, I'm not an educational scientist, so I don't really know how to do this, but I've read some things that people have good ideas how this can be done. For business governance, we probably need new forms of motivation and control. Since we have these new forms of employment relationships, this will be important. Work-life balance is another issue that is high on the agenda. And, of course, what does it mean for welfare states? We need to adapt probably benefit entitlements to the new realities, where we see less standard employment relationships, which means that probably we need to decouple benefits from employment relationships and move to some kind of universalism here, because this will no longer be the standard thing that we see, most likely. And then with a big question mark, will we see a wave of long-term unemployed when automation is ongoing, or will these people find new jobs? This is hotly debated, of course. Speaking about policy, I was asked to quickly address the German vision of Industrie 4.0, Industry 4.0. And I was told there's a lot of interest here in Korea about what is being done there. Now, there's only a limited amount of things I can report here, but the aim of this program is basically to shape digitalization in all areas that it affects. And for Germany, this is particularly important, as I think it is for Korea as well, because we have 15 million jobs in manufacturing. Many of them are in small and medium-sized enterprises. So finding the right policies for these companies is an important thing. So what is it, Industry 4.0? It's a support program on the one hand. 100 million euros of R&D expenditure is being given by the government to these research and development projects. But probably more importantly, it's a platform where different sectors work together: business, employees, trade unions, federations, politics and academia. They all come together and they develop actionable recommendations how to implement Industry 4.0 projects. They sit together to develop standards, also international standards, because obviously that's very important if you would like to speak to each other, basically. And they develop showcases and they develop testing grounds where small and medium-sized enterprises can go with their projects and basically play them through in a testing facility to see what kind of advantages this might have for their own production. And there are several spread all over Germany where you can test these things on these testing grounds. Now, what has changed in respect to the digitalization of industries? How has it been adopted? So there's a recent report about that by the German Ministry for the Economy, where about 51% of the companies report that they have that they are using Internet of Things applications. While looking at the data more closely, I think this is largely driven by logistics, by the logistics sectors who use RFID technology And I think they are driving this result. So the actual number might be a bit lower, but this is what has been reported there. 22% of the companies claim to use big data, and surprisingly, only 12% in manufacturing claim that they use robotics or sensors in their production processes. So you see, there's a lot of room also there for adoption of these technologies. The major limitations that companies claim they have, why they haven't been using this so far, is that there's a broadband infrastructure is not sufficient. You might know that because we have many of these small and medium-sized enterprises, they tend to be scattered around the country, and they're not centralized in big cities and so on. So that might explain why the broadband infrastructure is not always excellent. The second most important reason was data security concerns, and thirdly, also qualified personnel. And I think when you look at that, it links up, at least to some extent, to the things that Carl has said and that I also included in my presentation. So qualification is an important point here that we need to address. Thank you very much. I'm at the end of my talk, and I look forward to your questions.